Hello and welcome to From Mrs. to Me, a podcast where you'll be inspired by courageous stories of strength and resilience told by women just like you who have been through the upheaval of divorce. This is their journey from Mrs. to Me, finding their true identity and creating a bold, beautiful life. I'm Crissy Freeman and I'm your host, a certified life coach and divorced mother of two. Join me each week as we explore real stories of divorce and what it takes to transform and live in alignment with the real you. Hello and welcome to another episode of From Mrs. to Me. I'm Crissy Freeman, divorce empowerment coach and your host. My next guest, Laura Richards, is an international podcaster and author dedicated to empowering women by providing a platform for sharing their profound stories of darkness and resilience. Through her acclaimed podcast, That's Where I'm At, Laura unveils her personal journey of recovery from a 32-year marriage to a narcissist. Beyond her podcasting achievements, Laura is also the author of the best-selling book, There Is Hope, 52 Keys to Healing After Divorce, a book offering essential insights and strategies for rebuilding life after the end of a marriage. So welcome, Laura. So excited to have you here. So much to unpack as we talk about your experience. And thank you for joining From Mrs. to Me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you guys.
Great. Well, as you know, we talk about transformation on this podcast, From Mrs. to Me. And so what I'd like to do to start is, can you take us back and share a little bit about when you came to the realization that you needed to leave the marriage, knowing the difficulties associated with being married to a narcissist, and what steps you took to actually leave?
Well, look, it took me a couple of years to figure out.
It does with all of us, right?
I didn't even really realize he was a narcissist. I started to see like the warning signs, like gaslighting and things like that. Started to figure that out as I was going to therapy. And this was probably year 30, maybe 31. And I remember because I'm writing my my bigger memoir kind of book right now. And one of the entries I put was, how many years am I going to be crying over him? And that is when I finally started to really dig deep and say, am I going to live the rest of my life like this? Because I grew up in a house where my parents were married until my mom passed away. And even my ex's parents are still married. But I don't know that everyone is happy, in these long-term marriages. And so why are we staying married? And I don't promote divorce, but why are we staying married if we're miserable? And so I was really doing some soul searching and saying, do I really want to be in this relationship for like 40 more years? Because look, we're not dying at 50, right? We could live to be 100 and I have longevity in my family. And I'm like, am I doing this for another 40 years? Because I don't think I'll survive. So that was hard. And he did the reverse discard, which is with a narcissist. They make it so that you are the one who wants to get the divorce, which frankly I did, but I was too scared because he had me so manipulated, and like, you don't even know who you are. You're like a shell of a person at the end. And I didn't even have the courage to say I wanted a divorce, but he said that he's like, why are we living life like this? You should tell me you're done. That's what they do. They make it so that they have to be the victim.
Yes.
Because I know this is true because my grown children have told me, but he said that, oh, Laura asked for a divorce and, she left me. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, go ahead. And I'm okay with that. I've done a lot of work. I'm okay with him telling that story. And when he said, you have to tell me if you're done. And I said, why do I have to do it? And he said, well, I'm not brave enough to do it. He actually said something a little more crass than that. And I said, yeah, I'm done. And I actually started to say, oh, do you think we could work it out? And then literally halfway through, I said, no, I'm done. And I left I just stood up and left the room. And I was so proud of myself because that's not where really mentally I was. It took a lot of years to get to that point. But the funny thing is, the ironic thing is that narcissists will drive you crazy to go to therapy. And in therapy is where I woke up and said, "Oh, this is not good."
And did
so
he
then
go with you, or was this your own journey through therapy?
well, I mean, my own journey. And then every once in a while we would go to marriage counseling, which if you truly are in any kind of domestic abuse, which narcissism and narcissistic abuse is considered domestic abuse, it's a power struggle. So the domestic, what is it? The National Domestic Hotline does not recommend you go to marriage counseling because there is a power imbalance. And we got nowhere in marriage counseling. He found a way to make sure that I was to blame. I actually was told I should go on meds multiple times because I was so depressed and there was an issue and all this stuff. And our last marriage counselor, she actually gaslit me and said that he was very handsome and what was I complaining about. And so this is
Wow.
yes. And so this really shows you the power imbalance that happens but that really, I was like, I threw a toddler size fit and said, okay, I'm done. Like, I could not even believe this was happening. I'm like, I cannot convince my husband of 32 years what I need for my basic wants and needs. That's when you have an issue that you're begging for your basic wants and needs. And I just decided I can't do one more day. I can't do one more day.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about narcissism, and my former spouse was not a narcissist, but I was in a relationship with one very shortly after my marriage, and had exposure to someone like that, is the deceit, right? Is that deceit of they're one way to the outer world, and then to you it's completely different. And so really just trying to figure out, well, why do these people think he's amazing and it must be me? And so that has to be so hard. And one of the things that you talk about is helping others understand that deceit, right? And manipulation that you experience from these abusers. So how does understanding this, so understanding the deceit and the manipulation, help others to heal from these kinds of relationships in order to rebuild?
Well, what it really helps you do is you realize that it's not you. There's a reason why Dr. Ramani titled her book, It's Not You, because it's not you. And so one of the things that happened to me was he immediately picked up with his quote unquote new girlfriend. And that, like, it just, broke my heart and everything else. But what I learned was that it's not about me, it's about him. And so what it teaches us when we learn the patterns is that it's now not our issue. So we have our own responsibility in the marriage, but when they are being deceitful, lying, cheating, or whatever other things they're doing, it's not about us. It's about their own insecurities. It's about their own issues. It's about their own needs, because there is a wound in there that they are trying to fill, and we're not responsible for that. Look, even like say cheating. I saw a funny video that somebody stitched on Instagram, and there was somebody saying, this is how to get your husband to not cheat. And then she did funny things after that. But the first girl was serious. And I'm like, we have no control. We have no control, and we can be good wives and think bad things still happen. And we have to remember that it's not necessarily about us. They have a wound. They have something in them that's broken that they're not willing to fix because they don't think that anything is wrong, that what they're doing is right. And they want what they want. They're like toddlers. They truly are like toddlers.
Yeah. And it's this, thank you for saying that, because I think there's so many women that become codependents in these relationships. I did it as someone married to an alcoholic, but when you have a narcissist, it's like, okay, I can fix them. I know I can fix this. And you can't. To your point, it's
No, you
so much
can't.
of the work is around letting go of that control. There,
Mhm.
and codependency is a form of control. As much as
It
we
is.
want to say we're fixing, we're really helping
Yeah,
ourselves by
right?
going through that. And so, I'm curious how you were able to sort of let go of this story that you had about yourself
Yeah,
as you were sort of starting to create your own life
yeah,
after leaving the marriage. That can you tell us a little bit about that
yeah.
journey?
It wasn't easy, but it was increment. Okay, look, it took a long time to get there. And even if some people figure it out after a year or whatever, it took you some time to get there. It's going to take you some time to get out of that mindset because they have you so, beat down really emotionally and the way you're thinking about yourself. So I spent a lot of time reading scriptures and also like encouraging quotes and speaking life over myself and then really learning. And this is why it's important to me to actually teach others because really learning what happened to me and that it wasn't about me. And then, okay, so how do I get out of that? And really, it's that whole loving yourself. And then also, the ultimate act of self love was learning how to set healthy boundaries, not just with him, but with other people, because unfortunately, you're going to start seeing all the toxic people in your life, and
Yes.
to your point when you were speaking before about your ex-husband who was an alcoholic, it's the same kind of concept. You couldn't change him. And so we don't have that responsibility to change our spouse, no matter if they have any kind of addiction problem or anything like that. It's not our responsibility. We can encourage and we can be there for them. And that's all we can do. And so I just spent a lot of time loving myself and doing good things for me. And that was the most important. And then really I took a lot of time to just sit and cry and, and
Well,
be sad.
you have to go through the grief.
You
Yeah.
have to. You have to. Oh, I didn't realize it was going to be grief. I don't know why I didn't think that. I really didn't. I don't know why didn't think that I just thought I was going to walk out of my marriage and the problem was going to be gone and everything was going to be fine. And boy, was I in for a rude awakening. But I'm a completely different person. Like people still to this day, friends who have been friends with me for a long time they're just amazed. They're like, wow, you just like really seem happy all the time. I'm like, well, it's taken a lot of work, but I am because I don't have someone beating me down, telling me I'm a terrible person. You just can't have somebody doing that to you every day, all the time. So that's why you have to keep loving yourself. The fake it till you make it, it's sort of that kind of thing, just like speaking words of life over yourself and putting, things up on your wall. But I also recommend therapy, coaching, stuff like that, holistic therapy, exercising, things like that, that will help you.
Yeah. And I love what you said because it was exactly my story
Yeah.
around it took me forever to leave my marriage. I was in this place of I've got to protect everybody around me. What's
Yes.
going to happen to my kids? This fear all the time. And I was like, oh my God, when I finally got to that place of I'm ready, I'm going to do this. And then I got divorced. And I remember being like, well, wait a second. I thought I was going to rule the world. Like, I thought this was going to end and I was going to be like, hell yeah,
Yeah.
it's party time. Like,
Right.
and I was frozen and in fear
Yes.
because
Yes.
I think, and that's where this identity piece comes in, which is the premise of this show is
Yeah.
that you become so used to those patterns and behaviors when you're
Yeah.
in those relationships, you lose a sense of who you are
Oh, yeah, for
completely.
sure.
And
Mhm.
so that leads me to my next question for you
Okay.
is around really that I call it the journey of rediscovery. How
Mhm.
did you really start to sort of take those small steps
Mhm.
forward towards really trying to figure out who you are, who Laura
Yeah.
is outside of the
Yeah.
marriage, not as a wife, not as a
Right.
mother, but as a
Yeah.
person?
Well, my therapist was really helpful, and she said, start saying yes to a lot of good things. She said, don't say yes to a bunch of bad things, you
Love
know,
that.
because we could all curl up with a bottle or a glass of wine. And it's like, look, that's a temporary fix. But I knew that I didn't want to wait anymore. I didn't want to wait anymore for my life to begin, but I also needed to give myself that time to grieve. Right. So when she said, say yes to those things, I really had to figure out, well, things like, okay, he liked to go hiking. Do I even like to go hiking? We did it for, a million years, but do I even like it? So she said, go hiking and figure it out and see if you
Yeah.
like it. It was stuff like that. It was saying yes to those things. And then when you leave abuse, before that, you have such a brain fog from the abuse, and you don't even know who you are, all that when you leave that and you start resting and your brain starts recovering, you actually start to get clarity. And so I actually started to be like, oh, I like this thing, or you know what? I actually don't like doing that. And so I'm not going to do that anymore. And you start to separate, who am I? My friend called me Laura 2.0. Who's Laura 2.0? And compared to Laura, my ex's wife, who is she? And so those are the things. And listen, it's been 19 months. And just a month ago, my son said, do we want red or green enchiladas? And I said, I have no idea, because your dad always made me choose green. And he's like, okay, we'll figure out what you want. And I was like, okay, what do I want? You know what I mean? Like, it still comes up because it's a lot of unraveling. And that's what I've always called it. I had to unravel 33 years because we were together 33. So
33 is a long time. Well,
it
and
is.
you think about that, and you have been divorced for 19 months. Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah.
So, first of all, like, I applaud you, because
Thank you.
that is, I think that's a inspiration for an inspirational story for others to hear, because I think part of this fear is, am I ever going to be able to move on? Am I
Yeah.
ever going to be able, and being in a marriage for that long and
Yeah.
seeing you with the smile on your face, the work you're doing,
Yeah.
it's incredible. And
Thank
so,
you.
but what I love about it, and I want to be able to highlight for the audience, is that you can dig deep, and the power is within you. The strength is within you.
Yeah.
It's about getting comfortable in discomfort. And
Oh,
I
yeah, for
always
sure.
say that it's like,
Yes.
you
I love
have
that.
to embrace the messiness. You have to embrace the
Mhm.
discomfort and say, that's when change is going to happen. It's not going to look good every day,
Right.
but change isn't going to happen if I don't get uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
that's what happens in a lot of these long-term marriages, is
Yeah.
we get comfortable. And,
Mhm.
and then even things like, oh, I hear from so many women, we slept in separate bedrooms for years.
Mhm.
It's the norm. And
Yes.
and it becomes okay, because that's what you're used to. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's similar with you
Yeah.
after 33 years, is, oh, this is just how it is, until it's not.
Yeah. Well, you do. You get kind of comfortable. And that's one of the things that I talk to people about. I don't like to, when people tell me, should I leave my marriage? I'm like, I am not that person. Look, that's not who I am. I don't promote divorce. I promote not staying in abuse, is what I promote. It's the discussion of, why do you want to say you were married 50 years when you hate each other, or we don't even really like each other? Like, I literally, if you look at my journals are like, I just want my husband to like me. I don't think he likes me. And he didn't. You know what I mean? Like, at the beginning we were talking about, like, how did I how did I get out and things like that. And it's like, look, my divorce was very easy. Narcissists sometimes have people waiting for them on the other side, and mine sure did. And so he did not fight me. And then one day I was like, okay. And these are the kinds of things you have to break down and go, is this worth staying in a marriage for? And I've decided at this point in my life, and this is after a lot of healing, I don't fight for love that way. I don't beg anybody for love. And so that's why it's important to look at your marriage and say, is it how you want to be treated? Are you being treated the way you want to be treated? Are you going to live the rest of your life like this? I don't know. It's hard. I don't want to sound like I promote divorce, but it's not worth staying in when you are in an abusive situation or you are so miserable.
Yeah.
So,
And I completely agree with that. And I want to highlight something that you said, and that was around journaling.
yeah.
So journaling is what saved me. And so when people bring that up, when I was at my lowest low in my marriage, I went to my journal. I have this old pink journal that I still have, which is the one that really changed everything for me. It was
Yeah.
when there was the affair, and then the moments of, finding him in different places that
Yeah.
were very scary. I still have that journal because that
Wow.
journal was my savior. It really
Yeah.
was. It was writing down those words and then being able to go back and look at them later and say, okay, you're not crazy. These things
Right.
really happened.
Yeah.
And even though someone's story is different who's in that relationship, you experience them and you wrote them down in the moment. You live through them.
Yes.
And I think having a journaling practice, starting it then and continuing it on after,
Yeah.
has just been such a great mindfulness practice for
Yeah.
me. And so I would love to ask you, what others who use journaling, any
Mhm.
other tools that you've used from a mindfulness perspective or
Mhm.
just from a self-care perspective that have
Yeah.
gotten you through some hard times?
Well, I did things like meditation. I did a lot of walking and, finding those good friends that you can talk to because you're going to find those friends that are okay. I don't believe you should use your friends like counselors because that's a lot to put on somebody. So I had a very good counselor. I still do. I have had her for years. And then I've also talked to coaches because coaches help you kind of move forward, right? They help you with that moving forward in your life, setting goals, things like that. So, but yeah, journaling for me, instrumental. And just since we're a whole body, that whole thing of just self care, what does that look like? Meditation, exercise, eating healthy. And I mean, not, I don't do that all the time or whatever, but it was some of those things to really say, like, what's going to make me feel better? And then sometimes it was just, look, if I have to lay in bed and watch Netflix, that's what I'm going to do because you have to listen to your body. And I think that's important is listening to what your body needs. And then art therapy is great. So I do coloring and things like that, so anything that will relax you, arts and crafts, maybe you didn't do that before. Maybe now you have the opportunity to do that, especially me being older. My kids are older. It's like I have the opportunity to do some fun crafts and stuff. He never wanted me to do any of those things. Who knows for why, what reason, just another way to control. But
Mm-hmm.
now just doing things like that you find fun.
Yeah. And so a couple things, I actually wrote a note down because there's a couple
Oh,
things I want
okay.
to highlight and I don't want to forget. One of them is it takes a village. I always say this, and whether that is, and it's a combination. It's sort of like I called it my care team, and whether that was friends or a therapist or a coach. And so I want to highlight for a second that I've had a coach through like each phase. So I had therapy, I had marriage therapy, then I had my own
Yeah.
therapist. And I
Yeah.
think that's helpful to heal those old wounds, right? Those
Yes.
childhood
Yes.
wounds and
Yeah.
those continued patterns that have followed us. But what's been great about a coach, and I love that you
Mm.
highlighted that, and I like to always say the difference is
Yeah.
the coach a coach isn't going to go back to that trauma and have you
Right.
sort of relive it and talk about where that comes from and all of that.
Right.
A coach is going to talk about, which is what you said, a path
Yeah.
forward, help
Yes.
meeting you where you are, and then helping you to develop that roadmap so that
Hmm.
you can move forward. And I'm so glad, I've had different coaches throughout my journey.
Yeah.
I had one when I first got divorced that was all about moving me through the chakras and like really helping me get
Yeah.
into my body and the healing. And that was amazing. And then I've
Hmm.
had others to help me with my transformation. And so I wanted to highlight that quickly because I think
Yeah.
sometimes people wonder what's the difference between a therapist and a
Yeah.
coach?
And I really didn't know either until I started working with some. I have multiple coaches for different things, but I love it because they help me set my goals and then help me move towards my goals and giving me steps. And so it's been really helpful. And I still do therapy to kind of go through like what happened in the past and how I'm moving forward. And so it's been good to have both.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about friends too, because you
Yes.
mentioned friends and the importance of friends. And you do change so much. I mean,
Yeah.
for those that
Mhm.
haven't been through a divorce, I think it's really hard for them to understand. It's like any, traumatic event. It's
Yeah.
like, the loss of a loved one. It's very similar. And when you have
Hmm.
those big changes, it changes you. There's
Yeah.
just no way around it. And so I'd love for you to share, how did you navigate that, the friendships, because I'm assuming you had friendships from your marriage of 33 years. And
Yes.
then friendships, how did you kind of navigate that and figure out who is part of that core village for me moving forward?
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting. It's actually been the most eye-opening experience, I think, is actually the friends I lost along the way because they didn't understand because of something you were talking about earlier, the way that they are two different people. The narcissist will have a facade out in public and then be different at home. And so people didn't quite believe what was happening. I got a few people saying, "Are you sure that happened to you?" And so I did lose some friends along the way, which was fine. And then when you start to when you start to heal, and also when you start to be vulnerable, there are people who cannot handle that. And they will start to kind of like, they may have been your close friends and now maybe they become further away friends, like if you have a target or a bullseye, kind of thing. And they might move out to an outer level because they can't handle your vulnerability. It really depends on how people are living their life. And if that's too much for them, you just may not hear from them as much. And, the friends that we had that were mutual friends, I just knew like these were my friends, from whatever, like church or whatever other activities. And then he had his own like work friends and stuff like that. And I know some people do keep some mutual friends and stuff like that. I did not, because for me, I knew that my ex would end up with the woman he ended up with, and I didn't want to see it happening. And so I unfriended everybody I could think of, also his family, even though if there's a couple people in his family I really loved, I sent them all thank you notes and said, I really liked having you as an in-law and I wish you nothing but the best, kind of so they knew please don't contact me, you know. And that was a choice I had. And I think about some of them every once in a while, but it's not healthy for me to reach out because I don't want to know anything about him. I'm on full no contact. I have grown children. I don't have to speak to him if I don't want to. And so, yeah, it's so hard. The friendship thing is so hard. But the most surprising thing you'll see is the way your friendships will change because you are changing. As you grow, that doesn't work for everybody because they've known you as a certain person. And if you start changing, they may not want to be around for that. And you have to be okay with that. That was really hard for me. I spent a lot of times talking to a coach, crying about that, saying, I don't understand. And they're like, it's okay though, because we don't have to beg for love. So, and we don't beg for friendship.
Right.
So, but it is hard. It was surprising to me.
Yeah, that was really surprising to me too. But you
Yeah.
highlighted something that is really important, and you've mentioned it a couple times, and that is setting boundaries. And you've
Yeah.
stuck to them, like
Yeah.
sending those letters to family. And closing that door and in a
Yeah.
very kind, loving way.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be ripping it off and
Right.
leaving things in a bad place.
And
I
burning
love,
the bridge on your way out the door.
yeah, and you did that in such a nice way. I really love that, and I think, but also setting boundaries around. You're not going to communicate with him. You're not going to have
Yeah.
any avenue of communication to let that back in,
Yeah.
and or the new relationship he's in, and
Right.
he can't control you anymore. When
No.
you put that boundary up, that control is gone.
Yeah.
And that I think is a huge lesson for the
Mhm.
audience or anyone who
Yes.
is, leaving a narcissist or struggling with that is
Yeah.
those boundaries are super important, right?
Ugh, they're so important. And boundaries are great for everybody in this world, no matter what, because toxic people are everywhere. And, boundaries protect you. And often, okay, look, as a recovering people pleaser, I often thought boundaries were telling you what to do. No, boundaries are telling me what I'm going to do. If you don't, if you continue with your behavior, Crissy, I'm going to leave the situation. So that was the biggest thing for me. And so I was able to stick to my boundaries and know my worth. But that's a really hard concept for a lot of people. And when you get the idea that it's not about telling other people what to do, it makes it a little bit easier. And I did have two of his family members reach out to me because, I'm delightful. So they did
Yes,
reach
you are.
well, I just joke around, but I know I am because I've worked on it. but I had two of them reach out and I told them both, I said, I love you, but I can't have a relationship with you anymore, and they understood, and I just felt really bad. I kind of felt bad because they were both too, like I said, there's a few people in his family that I really love that I would want to have a relationship with, but I just can't. And I know that for me, it's the healthiest thing. That's an important part too with the going no contact. Your brain after abuse or after you've even been with toxic people, your brain wants a dopamine hit. And that's why you want to look at their social media. You want to know what's going on. You want that information and you'll get the dopamine hit, but then you'll feel horrible because
Yes.
you're going through like a withdrawal. And so I really had to go no contact. And in fact, I had to tell my kids, they do even ask me to this day because, well, I have three, only one of them has a relationship with him anymore. And he'll even say, is it okay if I tell you something? And I'll be like, yes, and so they know, they ask me first. And my son lives with me and he told me a couple things without asking one time. And it really bothered me. I didn't think it bothered me, but my subconscious told me at night, you know what, this bothers you. I had kind
Yeah.
of a nightmare about it. And so I told my son, I said, I wanted you to know that this happened last night. I had a kind of a nightmare about dad. And he said, oh my gosh, mom, I'm so sorry. And I said, well, but even I didn't know. So we kind of had a discussion. And I said, so please ask before you tell me anything, or maybe don't even bring him up. And he said, yes, I'm willing to do that. And so that was just the really good conversation that we had was I wanted him to know my reaction. And so that was my boundary. Now, if he ever did bring up his dad again, we would have to have a really serious conversation, like maybe can't live at my house. I don't know, whatever, you know what I mean? But those are the kind of conversations where I upheld my boundary and said, please don't speak about that. And in a way, I did kind of tell him what to do, but it's okay because I'm protecting myself. And that's what's important.
Well, and you're setting an example for your kids that they can
Yeah.
do the same thing, right? If
Yeah.
they are ever in a similar situation or in a
Yeah.
toxic relationship, you're
Yes.
teaching them that
Right.
we get to set boundaries for ourselves and say no.
Right.
And we can do it in a loving way. You did it
Yes.
in a loving way as a mother.
Mhm.
But you also, what I love, because my parents were divorced and it
Mm.
was very toxic. The communication was very
Oh,
toxic.
okay.
Everything was toxic. And, you didn't lash out at your child and say, how dare you bring that up? He's
Right.
awful, and go down that
Right.
whole path. And
Yes. Yeah.
that would have been unhealthy. That would
Yeah.
have been the wrong way to handle it. Instead, you were very
Yeah.
clear, hey, I'd prefer that you not bring him up.
Right. Well,
And here's
you have to
why.
think about you have to think about what your goal is with your kids. And I think about this really, we could talk about this about parenting really, but it's what your goal is with your kids. And it's to have a relationship. That doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but I want a relationship with my son. And so, of course, I'm going to have a civil and calm conversation with him so that he understands, and he wants the same thing with me. And so that he was very receptive, and we were able to have a calm conversation, and the boundary was very easy to set. And he even told me the other day, he said, I'm going out of town with dad, and I'm not going to tell you anything else because I know you don't want to hear it. And I go, well, thank you. And he's like, you're
Oh,
welcome. And that was
yeah.
it.
How
And
sweet.
I know
Yep.
that was it. And I was like, thank you. And
Because
he's
he
like, you're
heard
welcome.
you. Yeah. And
Yes. And I love that he went out of his way to say, and I know you don't want to hear anymore. Because I could have said, I think he left the door open for me to say, oh, where are you guys going? Or whatever. But I didn't. I was like, thank you. Because I have to remember. Look, I don't want another nightmare. You know what I mean? It's so I have to remember. So see, that's a really like I could have said, where are you guys going? What are you going to do? Who's going?
mm-hmm.
Because my brain wants a dopamine hit still. And
Yeah.
you're like an addict, and I have to stop and just be like, okay, great. All right, good. Have
Yeah.
fun. Have a good time.
And he
That's all I can
respected
do.
your boundaries in the process.
Yes.
So how great
It
is
was
that?
great. I
Right.
know it was great. Yes.
And speaking of kids, I get
Yes.
asked this question a lot because I think a lot of women struggle with it,
Yeah.
especially when they're leaving a long-term marriage, is
Yeah.
how do you navigate the whole sort of creating that new family unit
Yeah.
and without their dad
Yeah.
and creating new traditions? And a
Yeah.
lot of women really struggle. And so I'd
Yeah.
be curious to hear about how you navigated that after a long-term marriage.
Yeah. Well, I was really excited too because I felt like, especially when you're in a narcissistic abuse, you're under a lot of control. And so I was able to like get the kind of Christmas tree I wanted, put up the tree when I wanted. And I'm one of those weird people that like, summer's over, September 1st comes and it's like, let's put the tree up. It's one of those kinds of things. And so I had, since my kids were grown, but I did have conversations with them and say, what should we do? And what kinds of things do we want to do together? And so my daughter lives in a different city with her husband. So, when I went to visit them during Christmas time, they waited for me to decorate the tree and things like that, to be able to say, what do we want to do together? But even now, my kids still want to do the same Christmas breakfast that I always, something really simple, but the same Christmas breakfast I always made. And we just do whatever we want to now. And I feel like you have to kind of navigate that within yourself and kind of process. Am I worried about what is happening because I'm still kind of thinking about, am I hearing his words in my head, right? That control. Or do I really want to do this thing? It's like, why am I waiting until whatever day to put up the Christmas tree or whatever it is? Is it because that's what he wanted me to do? And so really it's just talking to yourself. I did a lot of talking to myself in the mirror going, you're doing a great job today.
Yes.
I mean, you have to, those days where look, you got out of bed today. Great job. I mean, it's that kind of stuff, just celebrate the little wins, but really just processing because it was a lot of unraveling. That's what I said. And it doesn't matter how long you've been in it. Unravel it. Is it your voice or is it someone else's voice? That's part of codependency. And that's why it's important to work on that as well. But that's part of boundaries, working on codependency and knowing who is that, whose voice is that in your head? And that can be for anything. Like when you look in the mirror and you do not look at yourself favorably, whose voice is that? That could have been your mother's voice. That could have been her mother's voice and she passed that down. It's those kinds of things. So it's a lot of unraveling to do, but I don't know. That's all I've been doing is healing.
Yeah. Well, and it's been 19 months, so that's not very
Right.
long. And,
Right.
and I think it's also celebrating the small wins where
Yes.
we do something on our own. I remember going to YouTube. I had this sink in my bathroom that was so
I love that.
clogged with my own hair. And my former spouse was handy. He used to do everything. He wouldn't let me do anything around the
Okay.
house. And I remember that clogged sink, and I was like, okay, you can either go get the Drano and try it that way, or call
Yeah.
somebody else to help you, or you can go onto YouTube and you can figure out
Right.
how to
Yeah.
fix this. And I remember getting under the sink with this
I
huge
love it.
wrench and undoing the thing, and all the gross
I
stuff came
love
out into the
yeah.
bucket. And I was like, I
I
just did
did
that.
it.
And other people would be like, are you serious? That's the first time you've done that with the sink? I'm
Yeah.
like, you don't
Yeah.
understand. Like, to
Right.
me, that's huge. I would look to him for that. So I think it's celebrating those things too,
Oh, yeah,
right?
for sure. I mean, anything, any little thing like that. There were a couple of times, I don't even remember, but just at the beginning where I was like, I've never done this before. Oh, and then when we had to sell our house. So in Nevada, it's 50-50, and he was buying me out month by month, but then I found out about his girlfriend, and I decided to be petty and say, just you have to give me all the money. You have to sell the house and buy me out. And so to navigate that alone, because he wouldn't talk to me, which was fine. We were on no contact, but to navigate that alone, I'd have questions, and I'd be like, who do I talk to? I don't even know. You know what I mean? And so talking to the realtor, talking to people who knew. I have friends, who are in the business. And so just that kind of thing, because you do feel alone, but that's no reason to run back. So just find your tribe, find those people. And the thing is that, like, when I was calling people going, look, I don't even know what to do about this situation, I had so many friends out there going, just call me. It's okay. We'll figure it out together, or you can cry to me or whatever. I had friends who would let me send them text messages that I wanted to send to him.
I
They're like,
love that.
no, they're like, no, send it to us. Don't send it to him.
Perfect. And we all need that.
Yeah.
So, tell me about your book. So
Okay.
you wrote a book.
Yes.
And we talked about it at the beginning, but I would love for you to just highlight. I mean, did you write that book within the last 19 months? Like, where did this book come from?
So it's what I call a little book. So it's literally 52 keys. And so it's about 125 pages. And what it is, and I wrote it last December, and I wrote it in an afternoon, because what I wanted to do was I just wanted to give people, like when you were asking me, what did you do to heal? I'm like, now I gave you 52. So one a week you can open up, there's therapy, there's all the other things that we talked about in there. There's 52 different things you can try. So I'm in the process of writing like my bigger sort of memoir kind of thing, where it's going to be like all the tactics and then how I've healed and stuff like that. But this book has been great because I feel like it's something that's helpful. You can journal in it. There's room for that. And it'll just give you ideas. I had a friend who's been divorced about 17 years, and she said, oh, you gave me some great ideas. I'm going to try them, so it's just that I just wanted to give people an option. When you're sitting around going, what do I do next? I don't know. Just try some of the things that I've given you. Everybody's journey looks different, but at least you can try some things in there, just like yoga and prayer. And I just gave you lots of ideas,
I love that. I was looking for, I remember after, because I always used to look to my former spouse for answers. And
Yes.
I remember after I was like, who's going to tell me what to do?
Right.
Exactly. I don't even know. And so
Right.
to have something that's so simplified like that, that's just,
Yeah.
wait a second. Okay, I can try this one
Try
today.
this.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it gets you just taking a step. It doesn't matter what it is,
That's it.
because the worst part is sitting in our heads, because our mind can be such a dangerous place to be.
Yes.
And these different mindfulness practices, different things that you can do
Yes.
every day, it keeps you out of that mind space that can be not nice to us on a
It's
regular
so
basis.
And it's so true. And it is all about those. So these are all ways too. There's so many different ways so it's those dopamine, the serotonin, it's all the good brain chemicals that you need. And that's why there's all these different things you can try, because that's what our brain is wanting so bad. So when you're sitting around, and there's nothing wrong with just sitting and crying or whatever, but it's when your brain starts wandering over to what's he doing today? And does he love her more than he loved me? And all those things that I thought, thank God I had friends and I had information. Thank God, for the internet, and we have such good information now, and books and YouTube and everything else that said, it's not you. Just like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. It's hard, but there's so many resources out there. And I just wanted to give people just one more resource. And then the other book I'm writing will have a lot of information. I actually talk about my journal in my next book, because I love reading back on my journal and going, oh my gosh, I was so low. And now I can see where I am. And so I want to talk about that. So I kind of am going through my journal and writing my book from there, so that people can see the progress and that it's normal. Like the things we've been talking about, that it's normal. Like you're laying in bed and crying, and then one day you're feeling great on top of the world, and it can happen. It really can.
And what a beautiful thing. I mean, I love going back and looking at mine too, because talk about being able to see your growth right in front of you. It's amazing. So that's another
really
reason
is.
I love journaling. So I can't wait to hear about this next book that you're going to have out. So, so as we wrap up, Laura, I would love for you to share with the audience how they can reach you and find out more information about you if they'd like to.
Sure. So if you go to that'swherei'matpodcast.com, you can see everything you want to see about me. And so I have everything for my podcast, and also other episodes that I've been on, like this one. So this will go on my website, and that way people can hear all the different things. So I've talked about so many different things, and there's going to be something. I hope there's something for everyone out there if you're looking for a particular nugget to help you on your healing journey. And then there's just lots of resources there. I have tons of resources for people on there. It's just one more resource for people, and I hope it helps. So it's that'swherei'matpodcast.com.
Okay, and I will include that in the show notes as well for everyone listening. And thank you so much for sharing your inspirational journey. And you are, I mean, you're, like I said, I mean, it's been 19 months, and look at all the things that you've been doing. So that is truly inspirational for those out there in terms of transforming your life. You really can do that at any point.
Yes, that's right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you for being here. And for those of you listening, if you are interested in joining the From Mrs. to Me community, you can find us on Facebook at From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce. And if you're listening to this live, you can join me this week on Saturday for a live workshop called Discover You. So join me there. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, so we can keep this going. And as I always say, you can't pour from an empty cup. So remember to keep doing that inner work. And we'll see you here next time. I hope you enjoyed another episode of From Mrs. to Me, real life stories of real women and their journey of transformation after divorce. I'm Crissy Freeman, and if you like this episode, please drop a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a story to share? Are you ready to inspire other women on their journey through divorce? If so, find me on Instagram at From Mrs. to Me. For more tools and resources on creating your path to transformation after divorce, follow my community on Facebook, From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce.